on the Google thing or the YouTube thing. What did I call this? I typed it in there. Okay. Today we are going about the idea of being cut off from Yisrael, from being cut off from Israel. Now, a lot of people will tell you that someone else is supposed to cut you off. No, no. Judaism, as per the Bible, does not work that way. Our walk with God is personal. It's our walk with God. Can it go beyond that where somebody else has to get on you? Yeah, it can. There's actually a story in the New Testament letters, and this is dealing with Jewish rabbis who wrote this. Very well qualified, trained by Gamaliel himself. So it's worth looking at. So, but anyway, there was this guy in the synagogue, not a church, a synagogue, and he was having an affair with his stepmother very openly. Everybody in the synagogue knew it was going on, and the leadership didn't do anything about it. And so he's jumping all over. What are you thinking? You guys have got to cut him off. Oh, no. Anyway, yeah, when it becomes blatant like that, and it's in your congregation, and you know there was murmuring going on over that, there would no doubt be that, and the gossip and all the other things that are not supposed to be taking place in the synagogue for sure. Then the leaders of the synagogue have to go to that man at this time. The way they handled it was they would go to the man, they'd sit him down, tell him what his sin was, and basically if he was belligerent about it or denied it or whatever, they would say, listen, you've got to not come back to this synagogue for the next 30, 60, 90 days, whatever. And if at that end of that time you're ready to repent and get on the right path, we will allow you back into our synagogue. If not, then we will either extend the time or you'll just be out. Jews didn't really excommunicate anybody. I mean, I'm sure it happened, but there's really nothing I've ever read that says that they ever did anything like that permanently. Because God's not willing that any should perish. If you should have learned anything from the story of Noah's Ark, you should know that God's not willing that anyone who's living a life that is trying to please God, he's not willing to let them perish. So much so he got the guy to build a really big boat, you know. And so Jews knowing this, we don't want to just kick somebody out forever. You know, we're hoping that they will get back on the right path, that they'll repent and get on the path, and all will be well eventually. You know, so the idea of repentance and forgiveness and second chances has been a part of Judaism from, well, before there really was Judaism. I mean, think about it. Abraham kind of was before Judaism. You don't really get Judaism until Moshe comes along, as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, it's a personal relationship between you and your God, our God, I should say. And so when we do something wrong where the law says that we're to be cut off from Yisrael, as far as I'm concerned, and I've translated these laws, I feel that it should be translated as cut yourself off, because it's really up to you. How do I know that after Pesach you didn't immediately stop by the store and pick up a box of donuts on your way home? I'm not a mind reader. And I don't have some prophet coming up to me, later on saying, "Thus saith the Lord, so and so is eating donuts." No, it could never work that way. But if you've done something like that, and those of you who know enough about Pesach to know you can't have leaven and donuts have leaven in them, then you understand what I'm saying, right? So I want to talk about cutting yourself off from Yisrael, from Israel. So if you have eaten leaven or find some in a place that is under your authority. Now, what that means is you own or rent an office building, a shed, a garage, or maybe your home. Whether it's rent or own doesn't matter. If you've rented it, then you've signed some contract. If you own it, you've definitely signed some contract, or at least you should have, because you may not really own it. If you you may have paid, but if there's no contract, you fall. But it's under your authority. If you are seen with or purchase anything with leaven in it, if you consume anything with leaven in it during this feast of Pesach slash Matzot, because you realize Pesach starts on the 14th, Matzot starts on the 15th. You follow? So they just kind of run together as a single thing. If you've done any of those things, you are to cut yourself off from Yisrael. Because again, I have no idea that you've done it unless you tell me. And so from the point that one of these things has happened to you, from that point until the feast is over, till the sun goes down on that last day of the feast, you are to cut yourself off from Yisrael. So what does it mean to cut yourself off from Yisrael? Well, let me put it this way. You are not cutting yourself off from Yisrael if you are visiting, having a conversation with, texting, emailing, or even snail mailing another Jew. Does that make it clear? Maybe? If you are made unclean by leaven in any way during this celebration and then decide to just give up, and what I mean by that is, well, I messed up, so I'm just going to go ahead and get me a burger and just eat my normal leaven filled foods. Or maybe you think you should just go ahead and purchase your regular food and drink to replenish your emptied out cabinets, because you went through the process, you got rid of all your leaven, you got in your car after service, headed home, stopped at the store, picked up a Coke and a box of donuts or something, and had all halfway eaten and had consumed your pop, and then all of a sudden it hits you. OMG. I just got started and I've already done this. So you're like, oh well. I'll just go ahead and live life like normal and go buy some more food because we're out of all that stuff I just got rid of. Or maybe you think you should just go ahead and converse verbally, have conversation or send the text or the email messages to other Jews who did not attempt to contact you. Please don't. Being cut off from Yisrael only lasts for 7 days. 7. You should still follow all the other rules of the feast and try to do better next year. If you find that you mess up almost every year, I'm going to be real blunt with you. You're not trying. Period. You are not trying. You need to take some time for some serious introspection. A congregant sent a text message to me shortly after our first Holy Assembly. So the feast had just begun. It simply said, unclean. He may have committed a sin, maybe 2. He did not elaborate as to why he was unclean, but if it had something to do with leaven, that would be sin number 1. Again, he didn't tell me, so I don't know. The second sin assuming the first was connected to leaven, was sending me the message. As I've already said, we cannot cut ourselves off from Yisrael if we are still in contact with Yisrael. Now, if I had sent him a message, assuming I was clean, and he simply responded with the single word unclean, there would have been no second sin, because that would be acceptable. If some Jew's trying to talk to you and you've become unclean, all you have to do is either say unclean if you're face to face, or type unclean if it's text or email or whatever. That's all you do. You're not allowed to say anything else. In short, what I am saying is if you come into contact with leaven during the feast of Pesach/Matzot, with another Jew, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. Here's what I'm trying to say. If you come into contact with leaven during the feast, do not contact another Jew. Further, if another Jew attempts to contact you, then and only then are you able to respond with the single word unclean. Friday afternoon, now this is toward the end of the feast, a different congregant sent me a long-winded text message saying blah, 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 blah. I don't remember what it said. Then the message ended by telling me that he found leaven-filled cookies among his belongings, which were in our house after the cutoff time. Thus, my wife and I were unclean. That congregant committed a sin. Now, suppose I had attempted to contact the first congregant before I knew that I was unclean, and he responded with unclean. He would be sin-free, but I would now be guilty of two sins, because I would not be cutting myself. I was supposed to have cut myself off, but I didn't know I was supposed to cut myself off, but still I was supposed to be cut off, and I'm contacting the guy. Yes, we can commit sin without even knowing it. Keep in mind, the only punishment for coming into contact with leaven during the holiday is that we cannot have contact with any other Jew except our immediate family until the feast is over. No one is going to hell. God is not going to throw lightning bolts or allow us to be in some horrific accident or send us to Christian hell. Just no. You just cut off. It is also important to note that most sin does not come with us being cut off with Yisrael. And I'm going to say that again, just in case you missed what I said. Most sins do not come with us being cut off from Yisrael. So please do not attempt to apply the cutoff rules that I am speaking of today to any other situation. While the first congregant could have avoided committing an additional sin by not contacting me, the second congregant was caught between a rock and a hard space. Contacting me was a sin, but not contacting me was also a sin. In fact, this event dominoed into strange and uncharted territory for me. The leaven in my house, though I did not know it was there, was still my responsibility, my fault, and thus also my sin. I am responsible for that which is under my authority. And in this case, it was my own house. Since I was unclean, I could not teach during our regular Shabbat service. So I broadcast a rerun video. It wasn't until I had typed a few messages in the chat that I realized I shouldn't be doing this. It was only then that I realized that I was not cutting myself off from Yisrael. If I was contacting Yisrael, which I was doing in those text messages. So I decided that I wouldn't do that in the second Holy Assembly service. I spent most of the day putting together a short, maybe 15-minute message that would give you guys some last-minute instructions on what to do until the end of the feast. And I'm talking about the message for the second Holy Assembly, along with an official closing that would take us just past sundown. I then copied the message onto a thumb drive and attempted to transfer it to the computer here in the synagogue. When I tried to pull up the file, it was there, but it was blank. So I went back to the house, copied and pasted it onto the thumb drive a second time. I even pulled the file up from that thumb drive to make sure it actually copied this time. I know you are all going to find this hard to believe, but I could have made a mistake in my first attempt. I'll help myself out. Anyway, the file was there. So I went back to the synagogue, and when I attempted to pull it up, it was blank again. So I grabbed another thumb drive and went back to the house, checked the first drive, and it was blank on the other computer that it had actually come up on in the first place. I don't know what happened. The file just went blank somewhere between when I put it on and checked it and got over here to the synagogue to install it. It was just blank. So I copied the file that I'd spent at least 6 hours putting together for a 15-minute thing. Y'all feel sad. I'm playing. This is my little world's smallest violin playing My Heart Bleeds for You. Anyway, I went back to the synagogue, and this time it worked. Well, not really. The file opened. All of the formatting was gone. And the text was now in something that kind of looked like Chinese. My first thought was to print the message on my home computer and read it, just not in front of the camera. But my second thought was, I'm not cutting myself off from Yisrael if I am talking to them. Durr. So I came up with an ingenious plan. I got my computer to read the message for me. That took a lot of work because the reader would pronounce a word correctly in one sentence and then mispronounce that same word in another sentence. It took a lot of time to get the reader program to do a halfway decent job, and time was running out. But I did it. I got everything hooked up. The video was good. The audio was the best ever. I formulated a plan. First step was to play our music video. Second, switch from Google Hangouts over to YouTube and then start the stream. The third step was play the lighting of the candles video. Fourth, I was going to blow the shofar. You wouldn't have been able to see me, which now that I just said that, how would that differ from you hearing me speak? I'm still, anyway, maybe you'll get that, maybe you won't. So it was a blow the shofar, and then next it was switch the controller over to the computer and start the reader program. The next step was to fade to black when the reader program reached the end and shut down the interweb. To say the least, things did not go as planned. I started the YouTube video too early, but Donna corrected me before we would have run into a copyright issue. She caught it. I wasn't even thinking about that. I had to jump directly to the candle video, which made me completely forget to blow the horn. I switched to the computer and hit the reader program, and there was no sound. Now, keep in mind, I had tested all this out and it worked perfectly when I tested it. But all of a sudden, I have no sound. I tried to start that reader program a second time and still no sound. I then committed another sin. In my frustration at everything going so horribly wrong, I typed a short message in the chat and shut the whole thing down. The sun was still in the sky as this debacle took place in less than 3 minutes, and I needed 8. I only needed 8 minutes for it to work, but it all happened in 3 minutes. So yet another sin. No closing ceremony on the last day, because as long as the ceremony, we start it before the sun goes down and end it afterwards, and then the ceremony is on the next day. Anyway, it wasn't until the following day that I realized that just contacting everybody to come to the service was a sin, because I was supposed to cut myself off from Yisrael. It committed another sin. Besides the frustration of not being able to hold the second assembly, I also had to contend with the horror of knowing that I could not contact anyone to let them know what happened. I couldn't even attempt the closing service on the following day because, again, I had to cut myself from Yisrael, so I couldn't contact anybody. Having said all that, I want us to look at a rabbinic parable found in the New Testament letters, because it is absolutely apropos to what happened. It's called the story of the Good Samaritan, and it's found in their letter Luke chapter 10. It's just verses 30 through 37. I'm now going to read you my translation of that Greek text. Verse 30. And Yeshua answered and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem, because they did not call it Jerusalem back then. He said Jerusalem, to Jericho, which you guys know as Jericho, and fell among thieves, which stripped him naked and beat him, departing, leaving him behind half dead. And by chance, a certain Cohen came down. It's very important that you remember Cohen. Cohen is the word for priest, and Kohanim is the word for priest in plural. So remember Cohen, it's important. This Cohen came down in that place, and seeing him, the guy that was beaten and left half dead, passed on the other side. He crossed the street and passed on the other side. 32. And likewise also a Levi. They probably said Levite in English. I don't look at the English. I'm not sure what they would have said, but it's exactly the same thing as a Cohen. Just saying, just throwing that out there. The Cohen are the Levi. This is important. So that likewise also the Levi also came to this place and saw and passed on the other side. They didn't want to get anywhere near this guy. But a certain Shomroni, they call them Samaritans now, on a journey also came upon him, and seeing had compassion, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring oil and wine. one for me, one for, I have no idea what the wine has to do with it. But anyway, and placed him on his own animal and led him to an inn and cared for him. And the next morning he departed and gave 2 silver coins to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him. And if it costs you more, I will repay you when I return, which would tell you this guy spends a lot of time at this inn, and these 2 people obviously know and trust each other, right? Anyway, which of these 3, Yeshua is talking to this guy who's, they're in a conversation, and so he's talking to this some guy. Which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor? The close friend is really what it means, but they use the word neighbor, of him who fell among thieves. And he said, the man that Yeshua was speaking to, he said, he that displayed mercy to him. Then Yeshua said to him, go and live according to God's law and let him take care of the rest. Actually, the text just says, go and do likewise. That's what that means. Go live according to God's law and let God take care of all of the other stuff. Where did Yeshua come up with that idea? Well, if you're Christian, well, he's the son of God. God probably told him. Or if you're Pentecostal holiness, well, he was God, so of course he knew. Okay, you guys on both sides can have that, but where does that come from? Well, it comes from Vayikra, also known as Leviticus, chapter 21, verses 1 through 4. And Yahweh said to Moshe, speak to the Kohanim. Remember I told you that was the plural of the word we just read? Kohen, the priests. Comma is a good place to put it right after that word Kohanim. Then it says, the children of Aharon. Aharon was a Levite. The priests, the children of Aharon, the priests, the Levites. And say to them, speaking of the priests, he will not be unclean. The priest is the he here. Every Levite, every priest is the he here. He will not be unclean for any person among his people. Do you hear what I said? The Kohen will not make himself unclean for anyone among his people. Verse 2, except for his immediate family, for his mother, father, son, daughter, and brother. And in verse 3, for his sister, a virgin, who is immediate family, who has no man. In other words, a virgin sister who is not married. For her, it goes on, he may be unclean. So who's the closer kinsman here? The Shomroni or the Levites who passed on the other side? Well, the man says the Shomroni. In other words, that was most likely a Samaritan who had been beaten and left on the side of the road. You should be able to understand that's what's being said here. Even if they were not related, they were both Samaritans. You follow? It goes on and says, a Baal, you guys know who Baal is, that evil, terrible god from the Old Testament? Well, actually, that's Baal is the king and creator of all that is. It's used of Yahweh God. Why? Because it's a generic word. Though there is a god called Baal, Baal is a Hebrew word that is as generic as Elohim. Both of these words are used of God Almighty, and they're also used of false gods, blah, blah, blah. But Baal is more specific to the idea of a lord, a master, a ruler. It's even used of a husband. So, no, we're not talking about the evil god Baal. We're just talking about someone who is Lord, Master, Ruler. Remember Yeshua for the Christians having the conversation with a certain guy, and he said, "You being a Lord or a Master of Yisrael don't even know this concept?" Baal is the word he would have used because they would have been speaking in Hebrew. Two Jewish Hebrew speaking men in Israel. You really think they were speaking Greek? Just because it's translated into Greek does not mean that's the language they were speaking. Anyway, so it says, this master, because that's who the priests are. They are the Lord. They are the master. They are the ruler of the children of Israel. They are the ones who guide them to the Torah. But this master cannot be unclean among his people by defiling himself. Is it starting to get the connection here? Some see this mashal as a slam against two Jewish men who did not care enough about a fellow human being to try and save his life. The person to whom the parable was offered recognized that the brothers show each other mercy. However, the mashal is not telling us that those who show mercy are brothers and those who do not show mercy are not brothers. That's not even true. A lot of people know this from personal experience. The least merciful people you know are your immediate family, right? I'm not alone in this. That's not. If the Cohen or the Levi, the masters, would have helped this man, not only would they have broken the Torah of God, which I just read, by touching a bloody body, they would not have been able to perform their duties, and the needs of many of God's children would not have been taken care of. Or in my case, the needs of our entire congregation were not taken care of. Somebody was supposed to call a holy assembly. Somebody was supposed to oversee that assembly. And that somebody, in our case, is the master. That's me, the rabbi, the teacher, the one who brings you to the Torah. And we're not talking master slave like, the 1800s Civil War stuff and what the white people did to the black. No, that's not what a biblical master is. A biblical master is a teacher. He is somebody who has authority, who has responsibility for leading God's children to the right understanding of God's law so that they can be in covenant with God. And in our case, I'm the only one. We don't have a replacement. The actual point of the mashal is simple. If we all do that which God commands us to do, and this is what I love about this parable, it should be obvious from this parable that if we do what God asks us to do, God will send someone to take care of that half dead, completely naked man. We're a very small congregation in the grand scheme of things. We do not currently have anyone who can replace me. Even if we come up with some pre-recorded message, we cannot use it if I am seen or heard on it. Because in that moment, I'm unclean. I'm supposed to be cut off. What I did was wrong. But who would be allowed to appear and or be heard on opening and closing messages that would be broadcast in my absence? Can we get some friendly goyim, some friendly Gentile to do it? No. What then? This year provides or proves that we cannot have one of our congregants do it because they may become unclean while making me unclean. Believe me, I can't think of another situation that would cause this to happen again. But I'll guarantee you this: there are many other situations just like this, just waiting to happen. I did not consume, nor did my wife, neither one of us consumed any leaven during this feast. We were not made unclean because of us consuming leaven. We did not go to the store and purchase any. We were not seen with any. What's the other one? Whatever I said earlier. I can't think of it now. We did none of those things. Somebody else did that. Somebody had it packed away in something, a bag or whatever it was, and didn't realize it was there. And I couldn't even have dreamt of saying, "Hey, did you happen to have any leaven inside your little night?" Because I'm thinking there's clothing in there. He was spending the night. How am I supposed to know? Well, now I know to look. I didn't know before, so everybody's getting a pat down next year. Just kidding. But you will be asked. At this point, I want to go over some things about cutting ourselves off from Yisrael as it pertains to Pesach and Matzot. Here's a quick side note, though, before I jump on that. Devarim, or Deuteronomy 16:3, tells us that the official title of the matzot, the unleavened bread, that we eat is given, the official title of that is given as matzot lechem oni, which means the unleavened bread of affliction. And it's called that because it reminds us that in haste we were led out of the land of Egypt. Bami Bor, which is Numbers 9, chapter 9, verse 13, tells us that if a person is unclean during the Pesach and does not celebrate it, or no, it does not say that. I read that wrong. If a person is clean during the first Pesach and does not celebrate it, he or she is to cut theirself off from Yisrael. Are you hearing me? If you do not plan to celebrate Pesach fully, don't be a part of it at all. And anyway, so those who do not intend to celebrate every rule of the Pesach, every rule of the Pesach must cut themselves off from the children of Yisrael throughout the entire celebration, a whole 7 days. They should not attend the Pesach meal. They should not attend the first or second holy assemblies or any Shabbat service that may land between the beginning and the end of the feast. Cut yourself off. If you're not going to do the whole thing, cut yourself off from the whole thing. Here's some reasons not to celebrate Pesach and Matzot. The first one I would give is, well, you're not a Jew. Not interested in living according to God's wishes. Not circumcised. I mean, those are 3 good things to start with. If you're any of those 3, don't celebrate it at all. Don't be going to some church and having a Pesach meal and then go off and live your life the way you normally do. Don't do it. Here's another. If you do not plan to stay out of your house after the Pesach meal until the sun comes up the next day, don't show up next year. Don't do it. If you cannot or will not purchase just enough lamb to feed you and yours on the 10th of Aviv, or pay your portion of the meal before the 10th, like if your congregation is going to put on the meal, you got to give your offering to pay your part of the food before the 10th so that they can purchase it on the 10th. But if you're going to do it yourself, you have to purchase it on the 10th Not before, not after. It has to be on the 10th of Aviv, not the 10th of your calendar. Another one, if you are not planning to remove the leaven from all of your dwellings, everything under your control, on the 21st day at evening. I just discovered that at evening was part of that. I've been missing that for the last couple of years. I'd forgotten that was part of it. If you are the head of your house and do not plan to make an appearance on the evening of Pesach, just before the celebration, the way we handle that over the internet is you just give us an updated picture of yourself. Or you get on to where you can turn your camera on and we can see you. It takes just a moment. If you're not going to do that, don't have any part of the Pesach. If you do not plan to make an offering on Pesach, don't celebrate Pesach. If you plan to move your Pesach food, you went out on the 10th and you bought the food, but you're not about to get rid of it afterwards. You're going to keep it and eat it the rest of the week. Don't celebrate Pesach. If you plan to break the bones of the lamb, I can't imagine why anyone would do that. But, if you're going to take the bones that are left over and carve little knife handles or something, don't do the Pesach. If you plan to work on one of the two Sabbath days or plan to work in your house, yard, or property, or whatever, that anything that's beyond what's necessary for prepping food, which does include cleaning up the dishes and that sort of thing, anything beyond that, don't do the Pesach. If you do not plan to cook meat over an open flame each night of the feast, or plan to boil the meat, or maybe undercook it because you like it a little bloody, don't do the Pesach. If you plan to eat the lamb before sundown, don't do the Pesach. If you do not plan to eat bitter herbs, don't do the Pesach. If you do not plan to eat matzot every day from the 14th of Aviv until the 21st of Aviv, don't do the Pesach. If you don't care if others see you with leaven, for example, eating a burger in your favorite joint, walking out of a grocery store with bread or beer or donuts or etc., don't do the Pesach. If you know that you are going to consume food and drink because you think it's legalistic, archaic, dogmatic to do so, in other words, you don't believe it's important to adhere to God's wishes, don't do the Pesach. If you do not intend to eat the Pesach meal in haste, with a rod in your hand, shoes on your feet, and a belt on your waist, don't do the Pesach. If you do not intend to burn the leftover lamb before the next morning, if you plan to communicate with your Jewish friends no matter what happens, don't celebrate Pesach. In short, if you do not plan to obey all the rules that the creator of everything that is, seen and unseen, you should not celebrate Pesach. Please don't contact the Jews that you know during this time if you are Jewish or claim to be on this path. Don't do it. That's the least you can do for your Jewish friends, is cut yourself off and not celebrate it at all. I hope that doesn't sound all harsh and all legalistic and all that, but these are the rules that God Almighty gave. And every word that has ever come out of the mouth of God is perfect, holy, pure, eternal. God does not change. If these rules were perfect, holy, pure, and eternal when Moshe penned them, they still are today and will be forever. Just don't do it. Now, that's not the same thing as you intended to do it and slipped up and maybe forgot and did something you shouldn't have. No, that's not the same thing. Your intention needs to be, I'm going to follow these rules as best I can. I'm going to try my absolute best to make sure I follow God's law. If that's it, celebrate the Pesach. If you mess up, you cut yourself off. That's the whole punishment. In a nutshell, that's the sum total of the punishment is that you just, leave everybody alone until the Passover is over, until the feast is done. That's God's not asking a lot. His burden, his yoke is not heavy, it's not hard, and his burden is very, very light. In this case, just go find someone else to hang out with for the next 4 or 5 days, Pesach is a celebration of the night that our God delivered us from the hard bondage of Egypt, caused by our Torah rebellion, our sin. What was that? Well, it was the sin of the world, the breaking of our covenant is called by the Jews the sin of the world. Some of you will get that. Obedience to God's Torah, to his law, delivers us from the pain of our past, present, and future. Obedience to God's Torah delivers us from our bitterness, anger, and strife. Obedience to God's Torah delivers us from our disappointments, losses, and shortcomings. Obedience to God's Torah delivers us from the bondage of our sin. Obedience to God's Torah teaches us who he is, what he wants from us, and what he wants for us. Obedience to God's Torah teaches us about his love for us, even when we believe that he will never love us, even when we believe that he will never forgive us. Obedience to his Torah teaches us that he loves us. Obedience to God's Torah frees us. Do you hear me? Obedience to God's law frees us from the curse of the law. In other words, the maximum punishment for breaking his law. You'll still be punished, but at least you don't get the maximum. Once we learn Torah, accept God's rule over us, in other words, live according to the Torah that we have learned, then and only then can it be said that we do not live under the law, but under or by grace. In short, learning and living according to the Torah is called by the Jews of old living by grace. It's not what the Christians have turned it into. You don't forsake the law because you're living by grace. The only way you can live by God's grace is if you're actually living according to his law, because that is called living by grace biblically. To reject the Torah is to live under the curse of the law. Obedience to God's Torah is the grace that sets us free. God is he's not the author of legalism. Can you imagine that? People tell you, oh, that's legalism and bondage. God is not the author of legalism. He is not sadistic. He is not masochistic. He is not cruel. The translators make him out to be, but the Hebrew text never presents God that way because God is not like that. Every word that proceeds forth from the mouth of God is perfect, holy, pure, and eternal. It is one thing for someone to listen and learn and slowly accept more and more of God's rule over their lives, because if you're coming out of a non-religious background, or you're coming out of Christianity and having to let go of all of that and follow after God's law, this is going to be a slow process. God's not expecting you to take a pill and all of a sudden you're perfect. That's never going to happen, and God does not expect it. it's so let me say that again. It is one thing for someone listening to and learning and slowly accepting more and more God's rule over their lives. It's another thing altogether to marginalize the King of Kings. Make sure you know the difference if you are on this path. Are you marginalizing God, or do you have something that causes you to hesitate? You know, we've only gone through a part of the law, so there's a lot of stuff missing there. There should be hesitation. You should wonder if maybe you should be going all out or all, you can only go by what you know right now. That's not wrong. God's not mad. If you have never tried living by God's law, I invite you right now to try it. I will tell you that following God's Torah is not easy at first, but if you are diligent, you will eventually discover that God's way is and always has been the easy way. It brings more peace than anything else we can do on this planet, no matter how bad things get. Life is life. It brings what it brings. But those who live according to the Torah tend to suffer from far less self-inflicted wounds than those who do not. So what will it be? Will you remain in the hard bondage of your personal Egypt? Or will you follow God's wilderness and learn to truly live free inside the boundaries of his love, his Torah? Shalom v'shalom, everybody.
The blessing, Be'ivrit. Yevarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.